Well, a very, very warm welcome to everyone who has made the time to join us today. I am Deirdre Hughes. I'm an Associate Professor at the University of Warwick Institute for Employment Research. I'm also Director of DMH Associates, which is a research and consultancy organisation, and I run an AI chatbot technology organisation. Our chatbot series, number 27, is on the theme of migration and well-being towards a more inclusive world. The webinar sessions and series began during lockdown, where I was lonely and felt disconnected to many colleagues and wanted to find a way in which we could connect with one another on subjects that were of interest to us. And really, I've had the pleasure of working with both Jennifer and Fusun and Daniel, actually, in over a number of years. Fusun, you are our co-host. Would you like to say hello and just a very brief intro?
Yeah. Warm greetings, everyone, from Ankara, Turkey. And it's my great pleasure to be part of this very exciting and challenging event today. And thank you for your participation. And once Deirdre makes the introduction, I would like to say a few words on introduction to labor market integration and social integration. But I'm very delighted to be with all colleagues and friends from around the world. And it's really a pleasure to be part of this very challenging venture.
Thank you very much, Fusun. And colleagues, we have 133 people registered for this webinar from Australia, Ireland, Singapore, South Africa, Canada, Sweden, Germany, Greece, Portugal, the 4 home nations of the UK, Malta, Turkey, Slovenia, Czech Republic, and a few others that I may have missed. So a very, very warm welcome. So let's just very quickly agree that for this next hour where we are together, a few ground rules. Number 1, there is no such thing as a silly question. So throughout this webinar, please use the chat facility or indeed the Q&A facility, where my colleague Robert, who has very kindly offered technical support, will be looking out and guiding us when you have a question or you want a response from us. So please use those facilities. I do want to begin really by just saying that we do have an apology, which is from Gideon Arumani, who was co-editor and is co-editor of this book, Migration and Wellbeing Towards a More Inclusive World, published by Routledge in the fall of 2024. And really what we want to do is, it's almost like a book launch, but most importantly, it's a free CPD event for you. I'm not going to read out really what the aims and objectives of the webinar are. You can see them here. You can also have a look at the book in more detail by clicking on the link. But really suffice to say that this topic is clearly one where we all know that when it comes to migration and well-being, number 1, it's a hot topic, but number 2, it is a complex topic, often one in which people talk about stop the boats, build the walls, keep people out. And we wanted to start the session with a little icebreaker, which is for you to use the chat facility and tell us what one action we can take to create a more inclusive world for migrants in a career development context. So please, let's get your creative juices going. Just give us an idea of what you think would be one action that we could take to create a more inclusive world. It'd be very fascinating. Just wondering, Fusun, anything from your perspective, one action you think we could take?
Actually, we know that the whole is greater than some of its parts. So I think all of us, different organizations, different people, different countries, all of us have something to contribute. And group dynamics is very, very valuable in this respect. So I think we should work together within the nations and all around the world to tackle with this issue. I think working together is my first idea here.
Thank you, Fusun. Caroline Wilson says, understand their background and their influences. We were talking earlier about what's in a name. So throughout this session, we want to give you a few practical tips. So the first practical tip really is sort of thinking about, you know, how a name can actually trigger a conversation like Deirdre, where someone in Egypt, for example, said, oh, Deirdre of the Sorrows, from sort of Irish ancestry. And I was amazed because immediately we had a spark, we had a connection. So think about that in your practice, if you're a practitioner, about what's in a name and how we can use that. Joan, is saying about understand, again, just flicking here, recognize and affirm skills and experience already gained. Gloria from South Africa, increase self-knowledge. Sean, ensure communication is available. And making our services accessible, absolutely. Rihanna, universal design across academic and professional service delivery. Collaborative events to raise awareness, creating a safe and trusted space. Keep all of those ideas coming through, because what we will be doing is you will get a copy both of the slides and indeed of the chat. So again, this may be something that will trigger more conversation in your own environment. Laddie, again, is talking about developing culturally responsive career guidance frameworks. And we're going to hear more from Jennifer and other colleagues on that. So thank you very much for that. I'm going to very quickly move to the next slide. And really just to say, most of you who are familiar with my work, I always think 3 key things matter. Livelihoods matter, places and spaces for personalized support, and ensuring that as we have technological advances, that humans are in the loop. And for this particular topic, the message I always like to convey is don't give up, you're not alone, and that you really matter. So very briefly, this is where the book, which we worked on for just over a year, we worked together to, as a result of the British Journal for Guidance and Counselling, it was a special issue. And what we did in effect was we wrote this book, and I want to give tribute to Helmut Zeloth from the European Training Foundation, because he sadly passed away while we were working on the book, a dear friend and a dear colleague. And so this book is a tribute to him. Fusun, you might like to say a very brief word about who you dedicated the book to, and then I'll say who I dedicated the book to along with Gideon.
Yeah, I've dedicated the book to my late husband, my dear late husband, whom, you know, has been a great contribution to my work and to my heart and to all my soul. And so I remember him very warmly here today as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Fusun. And Gideon and I also, along with Fusun, this book is for practitioners. It's a book that if you're interested in how to do this, you want to access frameworks, theoretical ideas. I won't go into all of the chapters, but just to give you an idea, hope action theory, cultural preparedness model, identity, and looking at a key to parenting in terms of 1.5 generation Korean and New Zealand migrants. Boundaries, how do we know the boundaries of our work? Ready or not, we're going to hear from Daniel, who was looking at, is Europe ready for career guidance in an intercultural society? So we'll hear a few words from him. Factors that impact on socio-cultural adjustment and well-being, job-seeking competency model, families left behind at the source of migration. We often talk about migrants, but families left behind and the implications of that. Learning engagement, again, a Finnish study looking at first generation of migrant adolescents, and a comparison of mental health literacy and attitudes and help-seeking attentions. So just by way of introduction, there's some fantastic rich resources in the book, and I'll say more at the end about how you can actually access that. I'm now going to hand over to Fusun, but I thought this little image was a good little image maybe to use around, as guidance practitioners, we are always looking to see how can we overcome barriers? How can we actually get beneath some of the issues and actually show that our skillful guidance and counselling practice really matters? And sometimes we have to break those walls down ourselves around educating others, around not demonizing migrants who join our local communities. We need to find ways in which they really matter and we make them feel they really matter. Over to Fusun.
Yeah, actually, your slide on Angela Davis' wise words, stimulated me. So let me build on Angela Davis's wise words. Birds of a feather flock together. So people who have something in common feel comfortable together. Therefore, supporting the migrants to develop new constructs for the new community, for the new society is very critical and pivotal. So this notion of building constructs comes from the construct theory of George Kelly. So I would like to say a few words on this construct theory that sort of stimulates the idea that each person has their own mental framework from which they see the world. So we perceive the world through our constructs, and people develop constructs as internal ideas of reality in order to understand the world around them. They are based on our experiences, observations, and interpretation. And we interpret the world with our constructs, and our construct system is our history and our predisposition to perceive. Therefore, I believe that it's very important to support the migrants to develop new constructs based on their new ecosystem of social context, economic context, and cultural context. And developing constructs could be through socialization process or through various ways that we will be discussing today in our panel discussion and afterwards. And the integration of migrants can be a difficult process for all involved, and it requires migrants to yield to the reality of their new lives, to agree to taking their lives forward, but also that the lives that they have not planned before, that they have not visualized before. So it sort of requires the receiving communities and governments to accept new arrivals, to accommodate their presence with material and spiritual generosity, and to be open to the possibility of enrichment and empowerment. I will stop by saying migration may have positive or sometimes negative inputs on the lives of the migrants, depending on the considerable number of factors that we will be talking on our discussion titled It Takes All Sorts to Make a World, a holistic approach to social and labor market integration with our eminent speakers. So back to you, Deirdre, to sort of move on with our discussion. Thank you.
Colleagues, keep those questions coming as we go along. Remember, no such thing as a silly question or your observations on chat. We always are up against time, so I'm not going to make a long introduction, but just to say how delighted we are to have Shabri here. You'll see his title. He's also in Turkey. Shabri, over to you. Give us a kind of global sort of perspective on this topic, drawing on your great experience in your work.
Deirdre, thank you so much. I want to start by saying how much I appreciate being on a panel with so many people with such a strong human touch. I love that. I really appreciate the idea, Deirdre, when you talk about, quote unquote, what's in a name. I love that. I think more of us should use that in the migration context. We struggle with being able to identify people who cross borders, cross international borders, who don't look like us, who sound different from us, who have names, Deirdre, either like yours, which are difficult to spell and pronounce, or like mine, which are just complex in any case, thanks to the cultures that we come from, and not giving them that representation, right? So I really appreciate you bringing that very strong human touch to this conversation. And Fusun, thank you for reaching out and really, encouraging and urging IOM to participate in this conversation. It's an absolute privilege to be here. I want to start by talking about a reference point that the international community adopted in 2018, the Global Compact for Safe, Orderly, and Regular Migration, GCM, as is now referred to. At the time, I was posted to New York as the negotiator for the International Labour Organization for the GCM. You know, a particular anecdote from the negotiations. Now, if you've all been to the General Assembly, one of the first things that you will note in a UN General Assembly negotiation is that the groups, the continental groups, like the African group, the European Union, the GRULAC, that's the group of Latin American and Caribbean states, are the first ones to be given the floor to speak and make a statement on behalf of all the countries that they represent. So if we go by alphabetical order, the first one to be given the floor on one of the rounds of the GCM negotiations was the delegate representing the African group. The African group delegate, now, once again, as per protocol in the UN General Assembly discussions, every conversation or every statement made by a member state representative is only for 5 minutes. The African delegate started her statement, and as she started her statement, the African group delegate, we had the timer ticking down. As the timer started ticking down from 5 minutes, 4:59, 4:58, 4:57, and goes down all the way to 0. At 0, it starts blinking red. And the chair of the negotiation, of that round of the negotiation, said in a very formal tone, like is said in a UN General Assembly negotiation, said to the distinguished delegate of the African group, I request you to kindly stop here as your time is up and I have to move to the next speaker. And so the African group delegate said, Mr. Chair, I am speaking on behalf of 54 countries. If you could give me 5 more minutes, I will finish my statement. And I would have really given you a comprehensive view of what 54 member states are thinking from the African continent. He said, your time is up. She said, okay, in that case, Mr. Chair, I ask you again, would you prefer that I take another 5 minutes and finish my statement, or would you prefer that each one of the 54 member states make a statement that is 5 minutes long? And the chair of the negotiation said, oh, can you please get rid of the timer? And he said, please continue with your statement. Now, the reason I used that as an example is the moment the African group delegates said that, 2 very important countries in the BRICS group immediately raised their right to reply or right to a response privilege. The first one said, Mr. Chair, we agree with the delegate from the African group. We would like no time restrictions for any statement that is made in this negotiation, given the complexity and the sensitive nature of migration. Every government and every country should be allowed to say what it wants to say for as long as it takes for it to finish its statement. The second BRICS country member state also just said, I support the statement made by that first member state. This changed the game, changed the nature of the way that negotiation then proceeded. And it was very important that I speak about this context, because that also goes to tell you how 193 member states of the United Nations came together with a lot of difficulties and sensitivities around the topic of migration. And finally, only 151 member states ended up adopting the Global Compact for Migration. I look at it as still a success. And the reason for that being 2/3 of the countries adopted it. Turkey being one of them, and in fact, Turkey also becoming a champion country for the implementation of the Global Compact for Migration. In fact, the GCM has 10 guiding principles and 23 objectives. The 10 guiding principles are as follows. 1, it should be people-centered. Any conversation on migration should be people-centered. Deirdre, when you put that first frame with somebody jumping over the wall, somebody digging under a tunnel under the wall, and somebody breaking through that wall, I love that image, because that's exactly what's going to happen. So if you look at it along those lines, the first thing that we need to be aware of is to make sure that GCM or any conversation on migration is people-centered. Second, that it is based on international law. Third, the idea that national sovereignty is respected. The fact that at the end of the day, we can say what we want, but governments do have the right to decide who enters and leaves their countries. So national sovereignty, number 3. Number 4, rule of law. Number 5, sustainable development. Number 6, a gender responsive arrangement or approach. Number 7, a child sensitive approach. Number 8, a human rights based approach. Number 9, a whole of government approach. And number 10, a whole of society approach. Now, if there were, I remember during the negotiations, some governments said, well, we believe that the national sovereignty principle is the one that trumps everything else in the guiding principles. While some others felt, no, it's the whole of government approach. A few others said it's the whole of society approach, and many others said it should be a human rights-based approach. If we look at it along those lines, the 23rd objective of the GCM, out of the 23, the 23rd is the one on international cooperation. If one says it's national sovereignty and the other one says it's a human rights-based approach, a third one says it's about international law, and a fourth one says it is about whole of government approach, how will we have international cooperation if each one takes only one principle into consideration? So therefore, all the 10 guiding principles of the GCM should be seen in a holistic manner. If we do not look at it as interconnected principles, we're living in a world where we are fooling ourselves about a comprehensive approach to development of migration policies. I'll add to that to say the GCM was based on or very clearly stated that the Global Compact for Migration is based on the Sustainable Development Goals, that this will be the blueprint for the implementation of the 2030 agenda in the context of migration. However, we need to also keep in mind that the SDGs didn't come from nowhere. The MDGs set the basis for the SDGs. In fact, in the year 2000, when the MDGs came into force, it was only for the developing countries and for countries in the Southern Hemisphere. It had 8 goals, 18 targets, and 48 indicators. This was in the MDGs. When the SDGs came 15 years later in 2015, it was like MDGs on steroids. It had 17 goals, 169 targets, and 247 indicators. The MDGs did not say once, did not use the word migration once, while the SDGs were peppered with migration.
Yeah.
And that goes to show how much governments and the international community had recognized that migration is as much an integral part of development as development should take into consideration migration. We cannot talk about economic, social, political development if we do not take into consideration migration, right? And the GCM and the SDGs, therefore, as someone who's worked at the global policy level, I cannot see the GCM and the SDGs as two siloed approaches or for implementation. I have to look at them hand in hand. I want to also stress on the human touch to it. I remember at the time, and thank you, Deirdre, for those few points that you mentioned at the end where you said livelihoods matter. You know, as someone working on labor migration, and we see all of these elements now playing out in Turkey, isn't it, Fusun? We see the issue of data constantly being reiterated by everybody. We don't know how many there are. We don't know how many there are in the informal sector. We don't know how many are employed and how many have jobs. There is a difference between employment and there's a difference between jobs. There is the idea that these 3 million, approximately 3 million Syrians under temporary protection living in Turkey as of this moment, keeping in mind that less than a month back, we had the Assad regime fall in Syria. And at some point, a lot of these people would want to go back. But what are they going back to? We were told that a loaf of bread now from our UN colleagues in Syria, we understand, and I hope I'm getting this right, that a loaf of bread now is 90 times more expensive than what it was a month back. Right? So what exactly are they going back to? How are they going to return? What's the readmission like? And what will be the reintegration of these temporary protection Syrians be like when they go back and return to their country, Syria? We have to keep in mind that there's a whole range of information that they require and which we require to be able to give them the timely information. That has always been a challenge when it comes to anybody in temporary protection or in a refugee status like that of the Syrians. The issue of legal identity, flexible pathways for migration, fair and ethical recruitment, issues pertaining to social cohesion and harmonization. And Fusun, we talk about social cohesion in Turkey like it's nobody's business. I have been in Turkey 5 months, and in the last 5 months, that is the mantra within IOM. There is no conversation that starts and ends in Turkey without talking about social cohesion. Of course, we will talk about social cohesion when close to 5% of the population of the country is under temporary protection and who are not Turkish nationals. We are going to have conversations on eliminating all forms of discrimination. We're going to be talking about skills development because, Deirdre, if it is about jobs, we need to keep in mind the fact that they need to have the appropriate skills. But on what basis are we going to give them those skills? Are we going to give them skills for no specific raise in a salary? Or are we also going to say, hey, here are certain skills that you may use when you return to Syria, and hopefully those skills will be recognized. Under what conditions again? So there's a whole range of issues that we can look at. And the beauty about it is every point that I made now comes from the Global Compact for Migration. There's nothing that I have said that I've just made up or, because I am an expert on the topic. I am an expert on the topic thanks to reference documents like the Global Compact for Migration, which has given us those reference points. Keeping that in mind and going with the same line of thinking, I want to also move, and I know we have a global audience here, give me an additional 2 minutes and I'll tell you, Deirdre, am I keeping with time here? How much?
Oh, you're very close. Another 2 minutes max,
2
and
minutes,
then I
great.
think we'll need to hand over to our next speaker.
Great.
But thank you.
And
It's all great.
I'll just leave you with this. My last posting before I came into Turkey, before I got posted to Ankara, was in Doha. My parents were visiting me in Doha. Now, I'm an Indian origin. I'm originally from India, but I grew up in Qatar. For anybody who has been to the Gulf, you don't even have to be to the Gulf. Just transit Dubai International Airport, and you will see people that look like me more than you will see people that are Emiratis, right? So that's because in a country like UAE or Qatar, 87 to 88% of the population of these countries are migrants. And majority of them are South Asians. And in that South Asian category, majority of them come from India. Majority of those Indians from that come from Kerala, which is the state that I come from in the south of India. Now, if I therefore now bring it down to one individual, and let's see if we are able to relate to this individual, not from my state, but from Africa. I happened to take my parents for a movie. The security guard was from Uganda at the cinemas. He happened to check our tickets just as we were getting in. We finished the movie, we got out, he was still standing there. 3 hours later, Bollywood movies are way too long. You don't want to waste too much time trying to watch these movies in one stretch. We walk out, the gentleman is still standing there at the security booth. It was 12 midnight. His shift had not yet ended. He had another 2 hours to go before the other movies finish. We come out. My father was feeling very cold. As you know what these multiplexes are like. They're air conditioned to the bone. And my dad was feeling very cold. I was holding my dad closely, close to me. I had my arms around him, and I was standing right in front of the security guard. He has a name. His name is Muhammad Ramadan. And I say that name now, Deirdre, because you said, let's identify people by their name. Let's identify these migrants by their name. Mr. Ramadan, at one point, as I'm holding my dad, he touches the back of my hand. And I look at him and I think, oh, I'm standing right in front of him, in front of his security booth. There are other people going to be coming in, showing in their tickets. So I said, oh, Dad, let's move out. Let's walk out of the way. And then he comes again, taps onto my hand, opens my fist, and pushes a 10 Qatari riyals note into it. And he says, get your father a cup of tea for me. And I'm thinking, there are many emotions that are running through my head at this moment. You're talking about a migrant worker who, during COVID time, they said that the first to be fired and the last to be hired is a migrant. We're talking about people who had absolutely no perspectives with regards to the basic minimum wages that they earned, simply because there were no basic reference wages in a number of these countries. Whatever little they have, they send it back home and they live on pittance for their own survival. Here he was ready to push 10 Qatari riyals, which is about $3 to $4, into my fist to say, get your father a cup of tea from my side. And he broke down in tears. And the reason I mention this is because somewhere we need to recognize these stories. We need to recognize the sacrifices these migrants are making for their families back home. The fact that at the end of the day, there was no national who was going to do that job, that it was going to be that migrant worker who had to come from Africa to do that job of checking tickets. We need to recognize the importance that migration plays to the overall development. Deirdre, I'll stop there.
That's a wonderful,
Excellent.
wonderful presentation. Thank you so much. And I think we could just fill the whole hour really drawing on your experience. But thank you so much for sharing that. And I know from the chat, people have also commented and have been looking for references, etc. I'm going to move very quickly on to our next speaker, Daniel, who's got 10 minutes. Again, 10 minutes is never enough. But Daniel, if you could try to keep to the time, that would be great. Over to you, Daniel. You're a guidance counselor, you're a trainer, you're very, very interested and have published works in the book on this topic, Is Europe Ready? So I'm going to drive your slides, Daniel. Over to you. Just tell me when you're ready.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I come from a more practitioner point of view. As I mentioned earlier on, I've been in Sweden for the past 40 years, and I have 4 kids, so I've contributed to the second generation immigrants as well. And I've seen on one side the generosity of Sweden, accepting people like myself. I'm from Ethiopia, Eastern Africa. And I've seen through the years the number of immigrants increasing in Sweden, and especially during the around the 2015, we had lots of immigrants coming into Sweden. And the question I've been raising, based on my own experience and the incidents which happened about 10 years ago, is Europe ready? Is Sweden ready? Is Europe ready for the increasingly multicultural society? And my question is, as mentioned, or do we have enough tools? Do we have policies? Are practitioners equipped to rise to this challenge? And here are a number of issues. Next slide, please. Here are a number of issues that we need to ask ourselves. Are we ready as a society? Are we ready for the challenges of diversity? Because Europe, and specifically Northern Europe, has been kind of a monocultural for a number of years, and it's about 50, 60 years since the country has become multicultural. So are we ready for diversity? Are practitioners ready? Do they have enough tools to counsel? Because when we come to the field of counseling, it's more of a Western phenomena, as opposed to people from other cultures. They have other values when it comes to counseling. Is the population ready to accept cultural diversity? That's also another question we need to ask. And as I said before, are our policymakers and policies ready to accommodate to the challenges caused by these groups? Because we have people coming from various backgrounds. Some of them are maybe at the beginning of their career, so to speak, while some have actually come to this country with a number of language competence and educational background, but unfortunately, policies are not there to acknowledge these competencies and education background people come with. Someone actually said, in a joking way, but at least there's a enormous truth in it, that the taxi drivers in Sweden are the most highly educated in the world. Someone said so. And this I call as a kind of brain waste. There's a enormous brain waste because at times policies are not in place to acknowledge the backgrounds people come with. Next slide, please. And some of the examples which we can ask ourselves again, in the sense of, okay, what are the competencies we need? So we need to assist and help people to identify, to document their existing skills, their qualifications, and work experience. We cannot delete 10 years or 20 years of life experience just because it happens to be in Ethiopia or Syria. There needs to be a way of how to quantify or identify these. We need to provide guidance on how to get foreign qualifications recognized in the host countries. When it comes to language and cultural adaptation, we also need to be more conscious in how to train and introduce people into the workplace. Language, of course, is a major issue, and the language also has to be inclusive, where we train people mainly on workplaces, educate immigrants on workplace culture, norms, expectations, and then hopefully we can also develop areas like a kind of a customized career pathway planning. This will be more of on an individual level. It's based on the immigrants' prior experience, aspirations, and needs of the labor market. What can we transfer? What skills can be transferred? What skills do they need to add to what they already have? And of course, the last point I mentioned here is mentorship, contacts. There is a phrase in Sweden when many immigrants actually refer to it. As soon as they apply for a job, the response they get is, "Thank you for showing your interest." That's the standard phrase they often get from after employing for a job. So we need to maybe look into mentorship, how to network, because the formal, official way of searching for a job, unfortunately, doesn't work. So networking, being mentors for immigrants is one way of helping them to join the workforce. Next one, please. And this is a shared responsibility. So it's nothing which is done just by one part. It's the policymakers, educators, both teachers and career counselors, practitioners, and there are a number of them which are in the field of career counseling, and stakeholders, employers, private and government agencies. Together we need to open our eyes. And this is not only a task for one group, it's something which we have to join hands, share experience, share good examples, and such seminars as we're doing right now is something which I think we will all benefit because we sit in the same boat. Thank you very much. I think that was the end of my slides, I think. I can't hear you.
I'm sorry, I put myself on mute. You're absolutely right, Daniel. Thank you very much, you say to us, but we say it back to you as well. And any questions that anyone has, please, again, just use the chat. There's some great conversations going on there. Thank you. And really, I think without further ado, I'd like to hand over now to Dr. Jennifer Mackenzie in Ireland. Jennifer is going to share her doctoral findings, but also as a lifelong guidance specialist internationally. She's got a lot of experience on this topic. Over to you, Jennifer.
Thanks very much, Deirdre. I think you have my slides there. Yeah, great. Thank you. So I'll talk around the slides rather than obviously going through the detail of them. And I suppose I would echo the chairperson of the UN in saying, don't have the time clock. I would have listened to Shibari and Daniel for the rest of this session. So apologize now in advance that I'm kind of interrupting what could have been more from both of them. So very briefly, thank you so much for inviting me to speak on this context. I completed my education doctorate with Queen's University Belfast last year, and my focus was on the guidance needs of young people of immigrant backgrounds, of all immigrant backgrounds in our post-primary school system, so our second level school system. And also looking at the competences and the training of the guidance counsellors to support those needs. So not just what's the list of what do the students need and what, or separately, what training should the guidance counsellors have, but how does this actually work together? And, going back to Daniel's point about it's a shared responsibility, and Shibari's comments about, the sustainable development goals and the human interaction. This is about two humans working together, a guidance practitioner and an individual student, and what can we do to best support them? And a bit of background to this then, that in Ireland in the last 25 to 30 years, we have become a more multicultural society, in that approximately 20% of our population were, quote unquote, from our census population, born elsewhere. But that doesn't also take account of the fact of the number of young people who've been born in Ireland for the last 20 years to people who have chosen to come and live and work in Ireland, whether they've come for personal and safety reasons, seeking asylum and gaining refugee status, or people who have been invited to come to work in this country because of their professional, medical and IT skills, or others who have chosen from an economic perspective that Ireland would be a good place for them to live with their families. So we have people living in Ireland from all over the world with as many different reasons for being in this country now. But the difference in the context of Ireland is, at this stage, that multicultural view hasn't quite reached our schools yet, in that most of the teachers and the guidance counsellors in Ireland are not quite from as many multicultural backgrounds as their students would be at this stage. So looking at my research, I took a systems theory framework approach, which is advocated by Patton and McMahon. And the research that I found, in my research, I found that the guidance counsellors and the young people in their care in their schools, they come from very, very different backgrounds. Now, this might seem really obvious. And sometimes it's the really obvious that we need to provide the research on to show, yeah, here's the evidence for what we think looks completely obvious. So the guidance counsellors and the young people have very different environmental, societal background influences. They have very different organisational influences. They work as part of the education system that the student is going through. And they have very different influences on a personal level, where you think that in most cases in Ireland, the teaching, the guidance counselling profession in the post-primary schools, we're from the majority white population. Most of us are not from the minority populations of people from Africa, from Asia, from South America. So we have a long way to go yet to have a more multicultural look about our guidance counsellors in the profession at this stage in Ireland. So what was very clear from the research was that the guidance counsellors, with the best intentions in the world, were ensuring that they were treating all of their students equally, because in a way they feared being seen as racist if they asked questions like, what is your family status? Is your family here on a visa? Do you have refugee status? Are you EU citizens? And that very, very tricky, delicate question is a very, very sensitive question, but can ultimately impact on what eligibility the student has for future options in higher education. So, for example, if somebody has asylum seeker status, they're not entitled to go on with state grants to higher education unless in very, very small circumstances. If somebody's living in Ireland where their families have work visas, that student may have lived in Ireland and gone through school for 12, 14 years, but they're still going to have to pay international education fees when they get to university. So they're very sensitive questions, but the guidance counsellors are very concerned about getting it wrong and upsetting and offending the student and or their parents. On the flip side, then, the young people in school felt that the guidance that they were getting at school wasn't specifically relevant to them, really, because the information they're getting is relevant to maybe their white Irish counterparts in their class. And also their decisions of what they're making, how they're making their career decisions was very much based on their family experience, their cultural experience, their own experience of education, whether in the country they lived in before they came to Ireland, or the fact that they started school in Ireland at the age of 4 and are, for all intents and purposes, an Irish person. But our citizenship laws suggest that they're not, because they were born in Ireland after the change in our laws. So while one-to-one guidance is being provided and group guidance and classroom-based guidance is being provided, the difficulty is that it's not quite landing, it's not quite sitting with all of the young people from so many different migrant backgrounds where their circumstance is a little bit different. But there might be 5 kids in the class where their circumstance is different. So it might be worth working with them as a smaller group. But what I found in the research is that because of this disconnect, so where the guidance counsellor may be coming from and where the young person is coming from, there's this disconnect so that the guidance relationship isn't building. And when Patton and McMahon, might go on to the next slide, Deirdre, please, when they talked about the systems theory framework, no, the one before that, just, is there that one? Yeah, brilliant, thank you. So where Patton and McMahon talked about the therapeutic relationship where the individual and the guidance counsellor come together and look at the environmental influences and the organisation influences to make that career decision. In this case, what's very obvious from my research is that there are barriers to that engagement. And that barrier to that engagement might be the guidance counsellor's reluctance to, address those sensitive issues, and also the young person's unfortunate but real experience of racism in schools. So where every student that I spoke to and responded to the survey said that they experienced racism in schools, they're not saying specifically that it is an experience of racism from the guidance counsellor, but they see the guidance counsellor as part of that organisation. So their experience of the wider school system is racist experience. And I'll use the, very colloquial phrase, lump them in. So they consider the guidance counsellor as, well, you're just part of that system, so why would I trust you? So the guidance counsellor has an extra effort to make to build that relationship. So I suppose I've identified this as a gap in the guidance process in this particular case. So if we move to the next slide, Deirdre. And I would have to say I'm not very good at diagrams, so that's a very, very basic. I'm sure I could get somebody to design a better version. So in looking then at how to overcome these barriers. So Daniel was talking about, there's a shared responsibility. There's policymakers, there's practitioners, there's the educators of teachers and all stakeholders. In my particular research, I was looking at what can the guidance counsellors do, but also my recommendations also include policy recommendations. So, for example, in the context of a guidance counsellor who works part-time in a school, in reality, they have 11 hours to maybe deal with 300 students with so many different and diverse needs and requirements and family situations. Really, we need the policy to address the needs of the students by allocating more hours to guidance counsellors when there are more students in the school from these immigrant backgrounds, because there's more to do. And some of the recommendations came across came from the research included the guidance counsellor looking at their own practice. So where guidance counsellors in schools in Ireland engage in supervision and reflective practice, unfortunately, it wasn't coming across that the issues coming across for their students are being dealt with in the supervision context. So for a guidance counsellor to look at their own practice, what is their own environmental, societal and organisational influences? For example, have I ever experienced racism? Do I know what that feels like? I may have experienced in my context sexism or gender-based issues, but have I ever really experienced daily basis, community-based racism? What do I need to learn about a bit more about that to understand where my students are coming from? What have been my cultural influences? What have set up my values, my beliefs? We've a great phrase in Ireland, I'm not racist, but. I think the minute we say I'm not racist, but, we need to stop there and we need to go back and go, am I? Rather than I am or I'm not. I have to think about this. Hopefully I'm not, but I have a lot to learn. So when we're thinking of our own influences as guidance counsellors, what are those influences for the students? So for example, what are the family and cultural contexts that they are growing up with? I had one example of one guidance counsellor explaining that she had a young student from a Muslim family and she really wanted to do hairdressing. And hairdressing training in Ireland includes cutting the hair of a woman and also cutting the hair of a man. And the family influence was, that is not going to happen for our daughter. So the guidance counsellor had to work with the student and their family contexts. So it can be a very, very complex, very sensitive situation that the guidance counsellor finds themselves in, working for the best outcome for their student. Issues like
Jennifer,
language, time. Yeah, okay.
I'm really sorry, because of time, we're sort of running out short of time. But Jennifer, can I just say that what's truly inspirational is that, you know, you're really given solutions here around how to overcome the barriers. Everyone will receive a copy of the slides. And I love the fact that you have actually reminded us about the good practice in career guidance and also that importance to be reflective oneself as well. I've got 4 questions, and that's really why I'm sort of pushing things along.
Do you want to take the slides down there, Deirdre? And we can.
Lovely, thank you.
Yeah.
I'll just move to the next. I'll just put a little hold-in slide.
Yeah.
Fusun, I don't know if we're going to have time to go through your slides, but maybe we'll just take 1 or 2 and you can sort of talk to 1 or 2 main points. I want everyone who's with us now to just remember that we are going to give you some free resources. So I do want to get to those so that you can see what our speakers and ourselves, what we've got to share with you. And if you're using a fantastic resource in your practice or tool, put it in the chat. And oh, Daniel, I think we get a little bit of feedback there. Not to worry, put it in the chat. And again, we can add it to the list. So we've got 4 questions here, just very quickly from our audience. The first one is, how can we persuade education policymakers and management in higher education to consider this when planning international recruitment strategy, and how to work with employers to advocate for the value of global skills? Rihanna, that's a very big question. Anyone in the panel want to respond? I know that I've worked in 4 UK universities and worked in other universities across the globe. And I think one of the most important things around planning international recruitment strategy is to be able to have resources that can influence strategic policymakers, like the sort of thing that Shabri shared with us earlier. Do any of our speakers want to respond to that? It's a big question, but definitely it's about connecting the language to available policies at an international level, because they have to connect really with one another. Anyone else want to add to that before we go to the next question? How can we work with employers to advocate the value of global skills? Daniel, have you got any thoughts or Shabri on that one?
Deirdre, I'm happy to have a go at
Brilliant.
this. In fact, the work with employers is going to be, not is going to be, but has always been and will continue to be crucial. Any conversation on labor and mobility will require an employer's perspective to it. In fact, once again, I would say that we would be doing a disservice not just to migrants, but the creators of the jobs, the employers, if we do not take into consideration what they have to say. Now, 9 out of 10 times, we don't speak the employer's language. We don't understand what the employer's perspectives are as policymakers. We also don't recognize the fact that employers are not just multinational corporations. They're also small and medium, micro, small and medium enterprises. We need to also recognize that employers don't necessarily want to constantly deal with bureaucracies because they also want to make money. They're here to build a business. They're here to grow a country. Employers contribute to the development of a country. So if we look at it along those lines, I think there needs to be a very strong focused approach in how we bring employers to the table. We need to understand their needs. We need to understand their language. We need to understand their priorities and how those priorities can then feed into our work and not the other way around. We cannot be going to employers telling them what they need to do because at the end of the day, they are the ones who are giving these jobs away. So I'll stop there,
Absolutely.
Deirdre, but just
Absolutely. I absolutely agree. And the next question from Victor, Victor was highlighting in the chat earlier, there's good and there's bad or evil, that exists. And how do we balance these in the context of migration and human stories, as well as the horror stories towards a more inclusive world? I think if you read some of the chapters in the book, you'll see that narratives are really important, both good and bad. And we've seen some examples from our speakers, Victor. So I think that's a really important thing, that it's not all just about telling the good stories. I've been to places where, I've seen migrant workers working in the hot sun, with very limited water, very long hours, and in essence being exploited. So I think advocacy is one of the words that in the book we use around. We've got to advocate on behalf of individuals in terms of bringing their stories alive. I hope that's helpful, Victor. Rachel says, given that much of our training and preparation for migrants focuses on securing employment in host countries, how can we better prepare them for a successful reintegration and employment should they wish to go back to their home countries? Daniel, could you take this one? Because in your training in Sweden, I'm sure you've had that sort of question about, what are we preparing individuals for, and how can we make sure that it focuses on securing employment in their host country, where of course, they're able to.
Okay.
I think because your camera's on now, maybe, Daniel, we're getting a bit of feedback.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Still getting some feedback, Daniel. Maybe turn your video off. Thank you. Just as Daniel's doing that, and I'm so sorry, I feel I'm really rushing things now. Caroline's saying it depends on the industry area in Australia. Some skills shortages, set up skills recognition hubs in the country where the student and workers are migrants. So again, I think there's something about practical things around setting up hubs, skill recognition hubs.
Can you hear me now?
Can I just add something here? Can I?
Yes, and then Daniel very quickly, and then
Daniel,
colleagues, I'll bring it to a close.
Daniel is ready, I think, huh? Daniel, I'll just take 1 minute. And I think upskilling and reskilling is very crucial for the labor market integration and the social integration of migrants. Therefore, validation of non-formal and informal learning is really a very, very promising tool for the recognition of the non-formal learning and informal learning of the migrants. And if even decide to go back, the skills acquired here and the trainings that they had here to upskill and reskill themselves, and if they are validated by a documentation of the vocational qualification authorities, then that could be a great asset for their integration in that respect. And also, I think one more point, we need to make use of a very, very reliable and valid EU tool for the third country nationals. It's a very good mapping tool for the skill mapping, for the qualifications mapping, and for the previous work experience mapping of the third country nationals, so that they could increase their readiness level for the labor market integration. And of course, it's important for multi-stakeholders approach in moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Fusun. And we've got the link. I'm just going to share that as I draw the session to an end. Daniel, maybe the final word from you. How's your mic doing now?
Yeah, just a point when it comes to employment. Just want to share with you guys that the Swedish government made some policy changes to make it easier for companies to employ, or at least, well, not easier, but attractive. So any company which employed a person with immigrant background, they could get some tax deduction. So that was a kind of incentive to encourage these employers. So what I'm saying is that we need to join hands from all levels, and the government has been taking some baby steps to make it attractive for employers to employ people with immigrant backgrounds.
Thank you very much. Well, colleagues, I want to just end here. I'm going to give Fusun the final word, but just let me quickly show you the resources that we thought you might find useful. Here we have a practical free toolkit about how to have conversations in a guidance context about building brighter futures and individuals' well-being. So you're very welcome to that. Here in the UK, we have developed a careers chatbot with translation facilities so that regardless really of your language, you can actually use AI technology to help in your careers information and advice exploration. And again, you get the link to that. I'm Vice President, one of 3 Vice Presidents at the International Association for Vocational Education and Guidance. And again, you may find it useful to have a look at our website and see what sort of things are available there, particularly also access to the journals. We, Fusun and I, are very practical people. We work as academics, but we are practitioners, aren't we, Fusun, at heart? And so we've put together just a list of resources, some of which books, of course, you have to pay for, just to say that the book, Migration and Wellbeing Towards a More Inclusive Society, the ebook is available on Amazon or Routledge, and we've given you the link. But there are other books that you might want to have a look. If you're here in the UK, here's some great websites that you might want to use. Fusun mentioned about the validation of non-formal and formal learning in Europe. Here are some, again, great tools and practical things that will help empower you to be experts as we go along in this journey. None of us are full experts, I include myself in that, but we are passionate, we are curious, and we are dedicated to making a difference to people's lives. Our next webinar, number 28, will be hosted very shortly, where we're looking at what do you want to be when you grow up? Are we asking children the wrong question? Studies of early career-related learning in primary schools. You've got the date and you've got the details there. So Fusun, last point from you. I feel we've cheated you because your lovely slides are here and summarize your work. But shall we just finish on this lovely slide? What did you have in mind with this?
Yeah, actually, dreams are extremely important, and we should use, as career practitioners, as professionals of different fields working with migrants. I think we should use the power of support for social justice to support the vulnerable groups, and migrants as one of the vulnerable groups, to change their stories and dream for their future. I mean, it's very important to dream, because dreams are extremely important. And if we could get them empowered, and if we could get them enriched, and if we could make them to develop new constructs within their new society, within their new environment, so that they could dream and develop new constructs and new beginnings or new plans, I think that would be one of our missions to move forward. Because as career guidance practitioners, we know that it's a moral issue. Individuals should get the best support to help them make the very best decisions in life. And also it's an economical issue, because too many people are in the wrong places, doing the wrong things, and not contributing to the economy. So I think we should build on those, so that all of us could dream better with a social justice perspective. Thank you all. This has been a very, very stimulating and promising session. And I'm grateful to all the speakers, and also to the audience. I have been following the chat. Very impressed and very touched. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I echo that to our speakers and to everyone. Have a wonderful day or evening, a good night's sleep if you're about to go to bed, or a good breakfast if you're just about to get up. I'm just going to have lunch now. Thank you so much, everyone. Let's keep this community of practice together. Let's keep the spotlight on this topic, and let's see how we reverse some of the negative rhetoric that we all witness in wherever we live. Thank you. Your work makes a difference to people's lives. Take care. Stay safe.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.